Okay. Fantastic. Well, welcome everybody to the first Equity Committee meeting of 2021. Recall this is a brand new committee of the board that is beginning this year, born from a lot of work that's been done by Dr. Akbar and Mr. Alexander over the last year, really spearheading a lot of our equity work. So today, what I wanted to do, we have a very packed agenda for today. And so what I'd like to do is just jump right in by making a couple of introductory remarks about where I hope we can go as a committee, and then pivoting to talking about some of our foundational documents. So first, as I was thinking about this work and what we were going to be doing over the next year together within the context of this committee, I kept thinking about all the conversations I've had with people on this committee and folks I've met in conferences as well, and I have inclined to have more of a science background, but I kept thinking about equity, and we keep talking about equity, that equity done right, doesn't require the calling it out all the time, right? Because it becomes a part of who you are. It becomes a part of your DNA. And I kept thinking about two words, genotype and phenotype. Anybody that's taken a basic genetics class, sort of knows these terms, and you think about genotype as being defined as the genetic constitution of an individual organism. So I kept thinking about what is the genetic composition or makeup of our organization, and how is equity intertwined, in that, within that organism, within that DNA. And I kept thinking about phenotype, and phenotype is defined as the set of observable characteristics of an individual resulting from the interaction of its genotype, that is to say its DNA, with the environment. So I know that many of us on the call, and I mentioned sort of this metaphor, if you will, because many of us on this call, have experience with equity. And equity, I think most of us would say that arguably already in our DNA and already something that is in the DNA of this organization. So it's already part of the genetic composition, if you will. I think one of the things I look forward to working with you all over the course of this year is really thinking about how we show equity to be in our phenotype. That is to say that the work that we're doing, where we convert, what's in our DNA to things that are work and fruits of labor that are observable characteristics, to those within the organization and also within our community, and beyond. The other thought I had was that, we have in the Army, there are many sayings we have in the Army, but one of which is presence is a mission, and so I hope that as we move this work forward, that equity becomes a greater presence in the front of our mind, and that we begin to be able to view everything that we're doing through the lens of equity. So having said that, again, I want to welcome you to this first Equity Committee of 2021. And so I'd like to pivot then, having said that, I'd like to pivot to just a quick sort of review of the foundational documents that our work, that everything that we should do should be tied back to and supported by. So for example, I asked Ms. Ferguson to attach those documents to the agenda. So for example, you'll see there's the advanced APS agenda, which we've presented to the Greater Akron Chamber and worked with you all to complete. There's the equity policy that Mr. Alexander really spearheaded back in 2017, and then there's the racial equity policy that Dr. Akbar and Mr. Alexander did a lot of work on and getting ready in 2020. And so we're not going to read through all of those documents. My hope and thought is that you all have had the time to review those documents prior to this meeting today. So I want to pause there before I go any further and just ask a question. Does anybody have any questions or comments or concerns? Is there any confusion about anything that you saw any of those foundational documents that you'd like to bring up for resolution or for discussion at this moment in time. Okay. So moving beyond that, so I want to call your attention to the APS agenda document. Well, first, I'm sorry, let me call your attention to the racial equity and policy document. So within that document, there on page 3, it talks about committee that partners with the district to review equity plans, recommendations, and receive regular reports of the district's progress. This committee will work directly with the superintendent and chief diversity officer. So I want to keep that in mind and then pivot with me to the APS agenda document and look at the second pillar, which is on equity. Specifically the establish an equity committee of the board. So those bullet points I think are important, right? So empower relevant departments and or staff to create strategies and targets that this committee will monitor. Work to make these strategies more about transforming the way departments operate instead of just maintaining compliance, and create actionable bullet points that include metrics in order to achieve successful implementation. So the reason why I asked you to couple those two particular comments together is because, you know, from my viewpoint as, you know, as co-chairing this along with Mr. Alexander, really one of the central aims of this committee is I believe, you know, to work with, you all to establish what the plans are going to be as this document lays out in relevant departments, and really empowering you all, to work within those departments and to create strategies around that target is, and targets that this committee, can in fact monitor. And so when you look at, when you pivot sort of back to the, meaning that this committee is not going to, in these meetings is not going to be in the weeds per se, of how you operationalize and draft those plan strategies, but that this is the body that you will bring those items back to for discussion. So I really envision this committee really being the parent of a number of subgroups, and some of those subgroups, and again, we could talk through some of this today as well. But some of those subgroups can include items like, so if you look back at the racial equity policy, so some of those subgroups can be, so you could have a supplier diversity subgroup, you could have a recruitment, screening, hiring, and retention subgroup, you could have, an equity and student discipline subgroup, an equity and finance subgroup, right? So these are all, so for example, finances, resource allocation, that's something, for example, that Mr. Pendleton, ideally would be sort of that subgroup leader as well, right? So those are just some of the introductory thoughts that I had, and want to pause there to kind of get this group's thoughts around organization and accountability.
Dr. Hall, I think that you may have it. I don't have the agenda in front of me. I think that you have on the agenda where we're going to talk about some things that we've done. I think it's important to understand and know that how it was birthed through the equity policy, which we already know. We vetted that and we got to work with the district to get the policy. But even more so, the work that Dr. James and Carla Chapman has done working together. So we have know where the foundation has kind of been built and what they have been doing thus far, so we can build upon them and we can add and include in what we have on our agenda as far as when we go to the racial equity policy, the racial equity policy. So I think it's important maybe even to hear a little bit from them, because I know Dr. James and Carla and even myself a couple of times have met and talked about equity and where should we go and how do we get all these things. So just so we don't do the same things or repeat, I think it'd be good to hear from them so we have an idea of what has already been started. Even, for example, the foundation of the finances, when we first came out with the equity policy, Mr. Pendleton started diving into looking at finances and looking at our system that we have and how can we break it down, look at are there any inequities in the process and where we could be more equitable. So I think we should at least have a little bit of input from Dr. James and Mrs. Chapman in reference to that, and then move forward?
Yeah, I think that sounds fair. Obviously, one of the things that we don't want to do, to your point, Mr. Alexander, is we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? So insofar as there's already work that's been done, definitely want to make sure that we're in the loop on that as well. And want to really tie that to hearing from Dr. James and Ms. Chapman about sort of what their initial thoughts are around sort of an equity framework for the organization. So, for example, the policy talks about the relevant departments kind of owning, if you will, their respective pieces, at least early on, as far as drafting strategies within their respective departments, and then bringing that back to the board committee, right? So let me sort of start there and ask Dr. James, Ms. Chapman. So what are your thoughts? First off, are there thoughts that you have, to Mr. Alexander's point, about things that we've already begun to do? And there probably is quite a lot, honestly. And then number two, what are your thoughts around organizational framework for that this committee sort of could adopt or undertake in ensuring an efficient process in evaluating sort of what is being done and what needs to be done?
So the one thing, the major thing that I've been working on is with HR and developing a draft of a job description that can be shared with the board, because that'll need to be approved so we can get an executive who's going to handle these issues for the district. And then the other one is, how we're going to structure that position, in terms of responsibilities. And I'm really looking more at, like the metrics that are listed in the advanced APS plan, in terms of where that jumping off point is, and then how they tie back to the policies. And I think, Carla might have some more to say, about some of that, because we have been thinking about how are we going to, embed these issues and get those metrics, and making sure that the departments are feeding that information up. And it really begs the question of getting a better defined equity strategic plan, what have you, in place, with all the things that the board wants to see, get done and accomplished.
Yeah, I would agree. So there are many layers to equity work, right? And what we have is our 3 and 3, which are those broad goals that the superintendent is referencing. But then we have to talk about how those goals translate to each department and division, and how they even trickle down to the building level. And so those are the types of conversations. And there may actually be work that is happening within each of our divisions that relate to the 3 and 3 goal, tie back to the 3 and 3 goal, but then may support it indirectly as well. And so I shared just the brief snapshot of some of the work that's going on. What I didn't share was the massive, what I call the DEI tracking spreadsheet that Dr. McWilliams-Woods is always kind of like, Carla, you got to put that in a system somehow. That's what I didn't share, because if you were to see all of the things that each department, right, is doing, some of them directly touch the 3 and 3, and others support the work indirectly. So the way that I have started to settle on how each department can own this work is to think about it through 3 areas: training, data analysis, and then action planning. Because all of us, no matter the department function, have that responsibility to engage in training. Is loosely used here because I'm talking about raising understanding and awareness and common language, self-reflective and practice and examination, and all of that in training. We all have a responsibility for that. And then there's how we use our data, the type of information we gather from our departmental lenses, and then how we use that information to create the type of actionable plans that result in outcomes that help further the advanced APS goals. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about it in my head, and I think about it often.
And I think one other thing is, on that whole data piece, I know I've talked to staff about, the need, I believe, or I would recommend that we look at a series of equity audits and bring some outside expertise in here. So like human resources would probably be the first place I would want to start, because we do have some metrics that are outlined in the advanced APS model regarding, increasing the diversity, our diversity recruitment and hiring of teachers. That is a big part of, I think our whole diversity, equity, inclusion work, which impacts student achievement, having students who look more like the kids who attend our district. So, we have to start somewhere. And I was thinking that might be a good place to start, is just finding the, looking at putting together probably more like a request for qualifications to look at who's out there, and then engage someone to do kind of that review of, our HR department and practices, and then identify data points and help us, learn what some of those metrics are and what some of the, not necessarily best practices, but I would say next practices that we can undertake. And then we would move on to some other departments after that. And my thing is, I'm not sure the same consultant, like for instance, when we go to like our purchasing practices, if that's actually the same consultant or that's someone else who maybe has more experience with, that particular area of our organization.
Yeah.
Dr. Hall, can I make one more comment?
Please, yeah.
Dr. James is correct in Mississippi, but I also want to make sure, because we're getting more into what administration does and so forth, but all this, the main thing and the most important thing that we cannot forget is how this needs to tie back into the classroom and attacking the closing the achievement gap as well as the opportunity gap for our students. If we don't do any of that work and we do it in the other way, we're not doing the work right. We're going we're moving backwards. So we have to make sure how all this ties into the academics of the kids, because that's the most important aspect of equity in education, is what are we doing to move the kids to a higher level than they currently are. So we don't want to lose sight of that as well. Thank you.
Yeah. I agree with that. And and the one thing I wanted to point out, and then Ms. Chapman, I'll go back to you, is, I think we have to, you can do things consecutively or you can do things in parallel. And there are certain things that have to happen. So sometimes, I have to have an A and then B and then C. And other times I can be doing things, again, in parallel. And so I'd like to challenge us to think about, there are certain about what things we have to do in parallel and what things we have to do. What things we can do in parallel and what things we have to do consecutively. So my thought would be is I think we can be doing 4 or 5 things at once. So I think you can have multiple departments that are engaged in various aspects of this, in parallel with one another. I definitely agree with Dr. James that HR is obviously a big place to start, and also would echo Mr. Alexander's comments that, and I had this jotted down as well, that how is the work of this committee going to directly impact students in the classrooms, and not in a year from now, much sooner than that, right? I mean, so because again, as they say, time waits for nobody, and so I was compiling a list of concerns, for example, and again, I'm not going to go through all of them now, but just as an example of some things that have percolated, I've gotten from parents and or teachers over the last 6 months. so things like equity and student discipline, right? So for example, I know we have Mr. Rambler on the line. So that's an area that obviously a subgroup that Mr. Rambler, hypothetically could own, right? There, of course, Dr. James mentioned the HR piece. So I don't know if that's Kathy McVeigh or Ms. McVeigh that would sort of head up that in concert with that consultant that Dr. James talked about as well. So those are just a couple of examples of things that we could be doing in parallel. There's, Dr. McWilliams-Woods, there's the equity and grading I think I brought up before that NSBA's talked quite a bit about. I know Mr. Alexander, Dr. Akbar were present for that. Ms. McKittrick as well. Also were in that session. And thinking about sort of equity and grading, right? So again, there are multiple things that can be happening in parallel. I see Mr. Pendleton. So Ms. Chapman, I'll go back to you first, and then Mr. Pendleton, I see raised his hand. I'll go back to him after Ms. Chapman.
Okay. Do you have a specific question for me, Dr. Hall, or do you want me to just continue?
No, I thought you were going to say something. So
okay. So yeah, I will say that what is happening, as you say, in parallel right now is the team working on an equity audit for human resources, business affairs, and community relations, family and community engagement, because of the goals related to advanced APS. So Deborah Folk is kind of heading up that team, and her people, along with Kathy McVeigh, Erica Glover, and myself, to follow the superintendent's recommendations for the response to qualifications, I think is what it's called. And so that is underway. I linked to the draft language of that work on slide number 3 in the progress box there. We are also considering how teaching and learning, curriculum and instruction, and where the rubber meets the road, where students and teacher relationships are concerned, with the new posting of the learning specialist in DEI, who's going to take a leadership role in that work. Superintendent James just committed to our participation in an equity audit. Dan can talk more about that around discipline disparities. So that is underway. If that funding should come about within the next 6 months, we're told. So yeah, there are a number of things that are already in place and underway that we can be doing as we're developing, right, kind of our own monitoring progress with this.
Sort of that point. I mean, I think, again, this goes back, to what I was saying earlier about understanding sort of what's in place already. And listen, I think, again, this is a new committee, obviously, right, with a bunch of folks on it, who may work together but haven't worked together in this context before. And so I think one of the challenges that we're going to have is, obviously don't want to boil the ocean. I think learning how to work efficiently and effectively together and prioritizing the work I think that is, going to be kind of the immediate challenge. And so that's why, again, you think of today's meeting as more of an organizational meeting, right? So kind of having a round robin or brainstorming session about sort of what ideas people bring, and then we can massage some of that, into a more cohesive framework as we move forward. Mr. Pendleton, I saw that you had your hand raised.
Thanks, Dr. Hall. A few years ago, senior staff, we had a retreat in August, and it's been, superintendent, it's been 3 years or so. And one of the things that sticks with me and kind of guides my work on equity is a podcast by Malcolm Gladwell. And it's titled Revisionist History. And it's a constant reminder. And so I just wanted to add to your brainstorming and outcomes that the outcomes aren't just a factor that we deal with. We're responsible for changing the pipeline. So I think that's the DNA of what you mentioned in the beginning. So changing the pipeline and partnering with University of Akron, which we are doing, to change that pipeline for now and forever. And so I've kind of incorporated, I need to go back and listen to it. It's been a couple of years since I listened to it. But an outcome could be that we're responsible for changing the pipeline, whether it be hiring practices, whether it be purchasing practices or corporate partners or vendors or what have you, that's something that I want to mention. I'll drop that Revisionist History podcast into the chat if you have a chance to listen. I think it's really powerful.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it. Dr. Akbar, did you want to comment as well?
I think that I think it's just time. Maybe we take a step back, and the way we organize, I think, is more so around one, dissecting what are all the areas that we want to identify, and then two, how planning a path around one, maybe when we request reports, or how we might go about getting the data for each area, and then also how we plan a path forward, right? So the administration has already done some significant work. So part of it, I think we have to get a education around what are already the things that we've identified as a district that we need to work on, and start there and move kind of in a more sequential way. I think along the lines of what Dr. James said is, okay, we know we want to do reviews of different departments. We know we want to do reviews of our discipline data, and closing those gaps. We know we want to close gaps in the classroom as well. So we can't do it all in one meeting. So I think we just have to be a little bit more methodical about it. But that first place is we have to learn what has been happening and what has already been identified as issues.
So thank you for that. And to reply, so may I ask this, the group this question, and this is just me tossing out an idea. I agree. Some more people have really echoed understanding sort of what's been done and what the current state is. Does it make sense to try to organize? And again, I'm just asking this question reflectively. Does it make sense to try to organize some sort of equity summit, if you will, where we ask different departments to kind of bring to the summit kind of what they're already working on, what they've already done, what they're currently working on that they believe would constitute equity work? I mean, again, I would love to hear this group's thoughts on something like that. Whether that would be an efficient use of time, or you see it as being an inefficient use of time. Just what are your thoughts, Dr. James? I'll start with you first.
Who was that for?
I was going to Dr. James first. I wanted to get his thoughts on something like that.
Yeah, so senior staff is currently going through some training with the Diversity Center of Northeast Ohio around some of these issues. And then what I did is try to, based on all the conversations I heard, particularly when we were putting together the racial equity policy and looking at, what I heard as priorities were the hiring practices and some of our HR practices, and also some of the student discipline issues. And so with student discipline, and which I didn't plan this, but I got a call from one of the regional, educational research people related to AIR, and they have some grant funding that could help dive into those things. And so I also have to look at our staff, and we have some staff who are in this meeting who are on multiple committees doing multiple work. When I looked at the discipline thing, I said, well, Dan's not on some of those other committees. So look, that's an issue. Let's get started, in that area. Let's get started with the HR. when it gets down to some of the other ones, I think we just have to figure out how we're going to parse it out. And then, if we look at the areas that the board is interested in, at least capture that. And then we can come back with some of the work that's being done in those specific areas to address a certain, item. And then, start going from there. I think we can do we can run things parallel. It's just in which areas are we going to do that, and make sure that those resources aren't being tied up, because they're also doing a couple of other things. And I would say, why not start, at the macro level with our advanced APS 3 and 3, and looking at the equity column and just going there and looking at, okay, we have some of these things outlined, what's some of the data that, we think we need to bring back and get a better understanding, around those issues. Because even today, like on pipelines, I talked about some of the things that we're doing at Bookto and North, regarding our educator pipelines. And we have had conversations with our university partners about how we can strengthen those pipelines. And some of the changes have already been put into play at some of the post-secondary institutions, primarily, that I'm aware of is at University of Akron, in terms of some of the experiences I think they want their, candidates in education to get, and how we can change some of the things that, that we're doing along those lines.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. So Dr. James, so following that frame of thought, that line of thought, it sounds like, trying to do an equity summit, if you will, to get current state is probably not the best way to start, as far as trying to understand current state.
I mean, it can be, we can have that, whether, a meeting summit, we can do that. We just need, some clarity on, like you said, you can't boil the ocean, but we can take maybe the parts that the board feels are really important, I think, at a macro level, and start there. And then as we get information and understand, what some of the needs are, then we can take deeper dives, into that. Similar to what we were doing, the process we use with Ryan's group, our CFO, in terms of looking at getting a system that speaks with our data system that, our educators use primarily, and having that forecast 5, be able to take those different pieces of information and put out reports where we can actually understand, what we're looking at from different points of view.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Pendelman, I saw your hand was up, and Dr. McWilliams-Woods, your hand's up as well. I didn't see who was first.
I took mine down.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Dr. McWilliams-Woods?
I just wanted to clarify, Dr. James, because I think I understood where you were headed, and I liked linking back. I pulled up what's linked on the document around that whole equity strategies in the 3 and 3 plan. And are you saying that the priorities for our committee would be to make sure the first 2 areas, the minority business enterprise and the recruitment piece, kind of gets the first priority and the greatest footing right now? And then in the meantime, we also do some of the data pieces that you're talking about. We can figure out how a reporting mechanism on the other strategies that are like the department strategies beyond the minority business and the diversity recruitment, that we could do some periodic reporting on other strategies. A lot of that is like in our CZI grant and our Hewlett grant right now, that already has funding and support, that we could figure a way to report that out. Is that what you were, is that where you were headed with the 3 and 3? I just wanted to make sure I understood.
So my thing was we have some metrics listed in 3 and 3. And you're right, there's some
Right.
work that's actively going on with that. So my thing was to understand at a high level what the board wants to focus on. And to me, it made sense, like the HR piece,
Yeah.
and like even our discipline piece, because I think we can get some traction there, because like in discipline that, Dan and his team aren't necessarily involved in some of the other pieces. They gave their input, with legal and policy, with the discipline piece and the racial equity policy, but we have to move that part of that work forward. And we have an opportunity to maybe get some funding for that. And, with some research help to actually do a deep dive in it. And I'd say, yeah, let's turn them loose and let's, move that piece forward. And then with our, if, getting in a consultant to do an equity audit, for instance, with HR to look at the practices, that's going to impact everything we do, because we're a people business. And so I thought, those were 2 areas that I think we could really get a jump start on. And then, the hard thing for me is going to be how we're going to reorganize ourselves so that all of this diversity, equity, inclusion work gets done across the board. I mean, we do have to, get our executive who will be over that work, and then figure out how some of the pieces have to be reorganized so that work flows in the right way and that it all gets done and we have some accountability.
I would love to have that discipline piece added in, that whole student behavior it doesn't have to be just focused on discipline, because it should be also about all the prevention, ahead of that, which I know is Dan's mindset always. But I think that would be wonderful to have that raised up as a priority. And we do have some funding in the CZI grant around that to support that. And there's other grant opportunities too, that we could look at through the Ohio Department of Ed. That would be great.
Yes, Dr. McWilliams-Woods, I agree with what you're saying. We said one thing that jumped out to me, one word, preventative. And how do we prevent some of these things so it doesn't have to go out of the building, so it doesn't have to come out of, it may come out of the classroom, but it doesn't have to come out of the building. It can be addressed there, it can be stopped there, so it doesn't have to come down to student service and they have to deal with it. Preventative is the best measure when it comes to that, especially with student discipline. So it might be, again, Carla mentioned training around preventative ways to prevent some things from happening in the classroom, or teachers maybe having other ways to deal with the kids while in the classroom, so they don't have to go to the office. They don't have to put more pressure on the principal. It doesn't have to be sent down to Dan. So those are some things I think is very, very important, preventative.
Thanks, Mr. Alexander. So I'm very mindful of the time. I know that we're at 5:10, and so I intend to have us be done on time. So there's at this point, I want to pivot and ask a couple what may sound like housekeeping questions, but I think are integral to sort of how we chart this course forward. One of which is who is not here on this call today that we think should be here. So again, this meeting was really meant to be more of an organizational, meeting, as far as we started, but really wanted to get the thoughts of this group of other people that think should be represented. So I see Ms. McKittrick Scott just chatted in the AEA, so which I would agree with as well. Are there other folks? So are there other folks that are not here that should be represented? So, for example, and I'm spitballing here, but does it make sense to invite a student board member to this meeting? Does it make sense to have a classroom teacher and/or principal representative on this meeting? So again, again, I don't want to have 50 people on here, but do want to make sure that we strike the right balance and have the right constituents on here to kind of share what their thoughts are about what we're doing. So I'll pause there to get additional thoughts.
Dr. Hall, I think you're going in the right direction, but I think when we start adding these people, has to be a specific time. So if they're being involved with the areas that they need to be involved with and not spend all their time in the entire, with the entire committee, they need to be brought in at specific times to address these issues or areas of concern, I'm sorry.
Yeah, gotcha. Mr. Rambler?
Yeah, I kind of like Bruce's point too. I think I'm hopeful that we create a discipline subcommittee, and I would think within that subcommittee it would be appropriate to have some teacher, administrator. I would also student board member would be great. I would also like to see parent involvement, community involvement, which is some of the stuff we've done in the past. Going back to well, a few people have said it. I know Dr. James and Dr. McWilliams-Woods and also Mr. Alexander had said it too, that we've done a lot with student discipline. I mean, well before me and then with me, we've done a lot. We've changed the code over times and we've made incremental movement. So I think it would be good to look at that history of it too, which was kind of mentioned, was looking at what has been done too. So, but I think, you know, going to your question about kind of like involving more people, I think that maybe we could do that through the subcommittee work, and that would be to get them actively involved in making bringing some information and bringing some potential decisions, and then that could be reshared with this larger or this more central committee.
Gotcha. Okay. Other thoughts?
I would say, you know, possibly looking at someone from juvenile court, and then also our own alternative, you know, programs that we run in the district in terms of some administrators. You know, we have our Akron Alternative Academy, you know, and have some of those folks also on the committee, and also to make sure it's diverse, so it's representing, you know, multiple perspectives.
Gotcha. Ms. Chapman?
We may want to add university partners to subcommittees as well, thinking about post-secondary and pipeline and teacher training.
So let me ask this question. So let me bifurcate my earlier question and ask it this way. So I get that there are thoughts around folks that we would want to include through the subcommittees. Let me ask: are there folks that we think should be added to this main committee as we move forward? So bifurcating it, as in there are folks that would fall in. We're going to add you to the subcommittee, but other folks that we feel like should be on this committee as well. You know, so if you were going to think about who should be, and again, and I'll poll some of you offline to get other thoughts around folks we can involve through subcommittees. Let me go back and ask the question again and just say, are there folks that you think should be added to this particular committee that aren't here now? And welcome, Dr. Glover.
Hello, I had called in earlier initially. I apologize.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay. So are there folks that you all think should be added to this committee that we haven't added? I'm assuming AEA would be somebody that we would add to this committee. Ms. McKittrick I'm thinking that was the thrust of your chat comment.
It may be worthwhile. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Hall.
No. I was going to ask you who else are you thinking that would be added to this committee?
Well, it may be worth considering the Administrators Association or representative if there is, you know, teacher representation. I don't know, Dr. James, how you feel about that, but it seems that would be a good balance to strike.
Yeah, we have, you know, a building administrator, or, you know, a central office administrator. Yeah, that would be fine.
Do we still have the ASAA?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The other question I wanted to ask is, okay, sorry. So other thoughts on other folks that we should have included? I mean, so for example, I don't know that was and this may have been an oversight on my part. Was Ms. McVeigh on this invite?
Let me check.
And if she wasn't, should we be adding her?
Definitely. When there's a HR type topic, yes, because we have to look at what's going to be manageable. Now, some of these people will be interchangeable, so they might, when there's a topic related to their area, they definitely, should be at the meeting.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. So far I've heard, as far as other folks we'd add here, would be an AEA representative, and then someone from the, I think you said Central Office Administrator, Dr. James?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else that we're omitting? That anyone can think of? So, for example, would we add someone from the Akron Alternative Academy to a subcommittee, or to this committee? So again, we're just talking about subcommittees for the rest of these folks that I have listed on here.
Right. For some of them, they could serve on both. It just depends on for a while, they may not serve on a subcommittee if they're on the bigger committee. But then depending on the topic we discuss, they may have to also jump onto a subcommittee as well. Gotcha. I think if you leave it as flexible as it is, because we're getting to a point when, as we get people back in school, some of those folks, like if you look at some of the principals, they're going to be trying to run their buildings. I mean, they are now, but with in person, it'll be a little bit more challenging. But I think we can make it as long as we keep it flexible, and some of those folks might serve that dual capacity.
Gotcha. Okay.
Or a counselor. I see Dr. Glover mentioned, a counselor.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. All right. So I've been taking copious notes as you all were talking. So want to pivot to kind of the last topic I had queued up for today, which was meeting cadence. So want to get this group's thoughts on meeting cadence. I'll just to be transparent, with this being a brand new committee and kind of with the depth and breadth of things that we want to sort of talk through and sort of research and maybe put together action plans around. I know for a while in finance, Mr. Pendleton, we were doing meeting every other week. And so my thought is what I'd like to do is start us with meeting every other week. And then once we've got subcommittees in place, then we would go back to meeting once a month, and then where the subcommittees are actually the ones who are doing a lot of the in the weeds work committee on a monthly basis, and we could provide some oversight and direction and whatnot. So, but again, so those are just sort of my thoughts. I want to kind of get the thoughts of you all as it relates to meeting cadence.
Since it's quiet, I'll speak up.
I'm gonna say silence is acquiescence.
I think maybe still just going once a month, because I think we always want to be sensitive to the needs of everybody's time in the different committees. Because I know for myself, I'm on a lot of committees and different things that are going on in the city, just like Mrs. Chapman, Dr. Akbar, and I think we got to be sensitive to a lot of those needs, because we can't stretch everybody too thin. I think if we start like we're starting now, and as we continue to rev up, if we need to rev it up a little bit more, let's rev it up. But I think we go slow just to start. That's just my own personal opinion. I can't speak for everyone else.
Okay. Other thoughts? Okay. So Mr. Alexander, how about this? Let me propose a compromise. How about we do the next meeting for equity in 2 weeks, and then we go to monthly from that point forward?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Again, I just want to make sure that we don't overtax, and like Dr. James was saying, there's a lot of these individuals are on a lot of other committees and doing a lot of work as well. So we got to be careful with that because we will start losing people.
Gotcha. Yeah. I definitely understand and agree with you. I just want to make sure that I get us on the right glide path first. I think we need one more meeting to kind of get our priorities sort of in order to move to move this forward. And there'll be a number of you that I'm going to ping offline via email and phone to get some things clarified and kind of get your thoughts on some other things as well. So that way we have that in place when we meet again in hopefully 2 weeks. And my hope is that at the next meeting, move forward with a committee action plan of how we're going to sort of prioritize and move forward. So I know, so last but not least, to kind of recap what I've got today, Dr. James talked about starting with really the HR piece and student discipline is kind of being, kind of the main 2 items of where we would start. You talked about bringing in an equity consultant to work with our HR folks, and then Mr. Rambler would start. And then Mr. Rambler would start to put together kind of a student discipline subcommittee, is what I've got jotted down here as well, in order to work around some of the data as what you've already done and kind of your thoughts as to sort of what you'd like to do moving forward. I've also got here as well. To think about a series of equity audits that Dr. James talked about as well. So Dr. James, I'll follow up with you as well to get some more details as to how you'd like to proceed with that as well.
Okay.
And then also, Dr. James, I have another quote attributed to you. That we again want to continue thinking about how do we reorganize ourselves to sort of get this work flowing. I think that's kind of the key main, if I could crystallize today's meeting in one sentence, that would be it. How do we reorganize ourselves to get this work flowing? So Dr. John, I'll get with you offline again and kind of get some more thoughts from you as a sort of, what you think we ought to kind of be doing to really get that off the ground and rolling. And then also there are also some materials that I think folks brought up today that might be great for some additional background reading if we haven't already had a chance to read some of those. So I know Mr. Pendleton was kind enough to drop that podcast link in the chat on Revisionist History. I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell as well. I think Dr. Akbar also mentioned the 1619 project, and I think Black Minds Matter. So those might be some other things that in our insofar as we can manufacture some free time. I know that's difficult. Where we would start to, add that to sort of our mental equity repertoire. And then last but not least, I think the other thing I had here was that we were going to, at least as we get started, try to follow the 3 for 3 and kind of, follow the outline that's laid out in the equity, within the equity box of the APS agenda for the next 3 years. So that's what I've got as far as kind of main bullet points. Is there anything that I am missing that I should have added to this list, at least in the short term? Thanks, Ms. Chapman. Okay. And then last but not least, meeting cadence. So by the way, as we move forward, let me apologize in advance because this is how I facilitate meetings. I like to get everyone's feedback on a call, and so I may call on you. That's not me being funny or trying to be unprofessional. It's just me wanting to make sure that everyone has a chance to kind of give their opinion. I know some people are not as vociferous or loquacious as I am. And are more reticent to share their thoughts. So Ms. Gizik, I'm talking about you. So going to be coming back to you, well, as others. So I won't put you in a spot right now because I know we're at time. But as we move forward, you both have a ton of experience with the district, and and so definitely want to really kind of rely on and kind of leverage your additional institutional knowledge of sort of where we've been and where we and your thoughts on where you'd like to see us go as well. And then last but not least, what I've got on here is meeting cadence. So Mr. Alexander, I think we're in sync around doing a meeting again in 2 weeks, and then we would move to a monthly meeting thereafterward, and try to have and by then hopefully have some subgroups up and running. So I'll be doing some behind the scenes work with you all to kind of think about how we move that forward. So I know we're at 5:27. Again, I believe in military precision. I like to start on time and end on time. So we're at 5:27. And so I want to ask, are there any, in the remaining 3 minutes, are there any additional sort of parting thoughts or comments that anybody's got?
Dr. Hall, if I could, this is such a minor thing, but I don't want to miss it. When we look at the subcommittee, we should focus on not the idea of student discipline, but kind of what Mr. Alexander had mentioned too. But I like to think of it more as student expectations and student behavior, because discipline is the after effect. So it's really a whole point. I guess I like to focus that other direction a little bit.
More proactive support, right, Dan?
Okay. No, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yes, Carla.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great thought. Thank you, Mr. Rambo. I appreciate it. Okay. All right. Are there other thoughts, Mr. Akbar? I'm sorry, Dr. Akbar?
Yes. I think I agree with Mr. Ramler, but I also would just add a caveat around the way in which we create systems of inequity that create, I don't want to say poor expectations, but expectations that are one way instead of a whole community of expectations. So I think that that's part of the whole looking at our discipline disparities. Is also looking at the way in which we create systems that over discipline certain individuals over others. And part of that happens with expectations and the presumption of criminality or guilt. And so those things are also things we have to look at. So it's really about systems as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Akbar. Appreciate that as well. So I see that we're at 5:29. So again, just in the last 60 seconds, are there any more ideas or thoughts?
I think
so I would encourage you. I'm sorry, Ms. Chapman. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we have real opportunity here to do some good work.
Okay, great. I agree. So let me, in closing, it's 5:30. So let me thank you for your time today. I appreciate your contributions. I'll be following up with a number of you offline. I would encourage you, if you have any follow-up thoughts or questions or comments or concerns, I'm very interested in hearing that. If you got feedback even on how this meeting was run today, good, bad, and indifferent, good, bad, and ugly, please send it my way. And so having said that, again, we're at time. I bid you all a good rest of your evening, and we'll be talking with you again soon. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good night.
Even how this meeting was run today, good, bad, and indifferent, good, bad, and ugly, please send it my way. And so having said that, again, we're at time.